Hello, everyone. It's me, David Chen, here on my YouTube channel at youtube.com/DaveChensky to talk about the Marvel original series streaming right now on Disney Plus, What If? This week, we're going to cover episode 2 of What If, and joining me, as always, to talk about all things Marvel, superhero, comic book related, he is the co-host of the Amazing Spider Talk podcast, Dan Gvozden. Dan, thanks for joining me today, man.
It's great to be here with you, David, and all of our listeners and viewers. This is going to be a really fun series, and I'm glad we have so many people along for the ride with us.
Typically, we broadcast these episodes live, but due to scheduling reasons, we had to record this in advance and put it up on YouTube. But the way this works is basically that every week, we're going to be recapping the episode of What If, diving into what's going on in the comics and how it relates, diving into what's going on in the MCU and how it relates. We're going to spoil every episode of What If. If you want the high-quality audio version of this podcast, just go to patreon.com/DaveChen. All patrons will receive a high-quality audio version that you can put as a podcast into your podcast app. Also want to encourage you to check out Dan's podcast, Amazing Spider Talk. If you like what Dan has to say here, you're probably going to like what he has to say on that podcast. Okay, let's dive into this week's episode, episode 2. And this episode essentially asks, what if T'Challa was Star-Lord? What if Yondu kidnapped T'Challa instead of Peter Quill, right? Mm-hmm. Let's start with overall thoughts on this episode. You and I both had a lot of fun with episode 1 with Captain Carter as the first Avenger, but we kind of felt like some elements of the premise of What If, in that case, were unexplored. Some of the more deeper nuances, some of the more interesting relational components. What did you think of this episode compared to the first one, and also overall?
Yeah, I mean, I think this one is a big step forward from the first one. I've seen some people feeling the opposite online, but like to me, this feels very much like a greater exploration of the concept of what if. You know, it's not just a character swap, although it kind of starts off that way. But I think the fun thing for me about What If is how the whole universe has changed just by swapping characters or changing something. And I don't feel like in the first episode all that much really deviated from its past version in Captain America First Avenger. Whereas here, like, they almost present an entirely new Marvel universe. I think most evidently, and I'm sure we'll talk about this, in the form of how Thanos is represented in the show. But like, to me, that's like the fun of this, is getting almost like dense exposition, in terms of how the universe has changed, maybe for better, maybe for worse, maybe a mixed bag between the two. But I also just felt like the dialogue was a bit more crackling here. Mm-hmm. It's more playful. I didn't think it was quite as visually dazzling as the first episode, even though the animation, I'll say by this episode, it was warming on me a little bit, but it still feels a little uncanny valley. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think this was a step forward, at least in terms of what I expect out of a What If story.
I really enjoyed this episode a lot as well. And what's great about this episode, there's two things that stand out to me about it. One is that it kind of is a huge dig at Chris Pratt's version of Star-Lord. You know, like, it's like, not only is, if a different person became Star-Lord, would they not be like super lame, but they're actually like, they change dramatically, like, the universe for the better. Like, that's you sub in T'Challa for the original Star-Lord, and it's like, wow, everyone's life improves, basically. And it's like, wow, it's sweep. Infinity War never even happens, right? Is like how dramatic the change is. And so I think it's funny just that it's an episode-long dig against Chris Pratt's version of Star-Lord, but also what's great about it is you get to see characters that we've really enjoyed in like a completely different context than we've seen them before. Right. And in Captain Carter and the first Avenger, the first episode, like, you saw Captain Carter kicking ass and doing all these things that we didn't see, but they're fundamentally still the same people, right? Like, they're fundamentally still overall the same character. Whereas in this episode, it's like, what if Thanos was actually a good guy? You know, like, what if, and all these other things that result from theoretically T'Challa becoming Star-Lord instead of Peter Quill. So That I appreciate. That I thought was a lot of fun.
It's funny because it tries to play with the idea that, like, okay, karmically everything can't be good, so like not is the universe is better, but Wakanda doesn't exist. Until we find out that that was not true either. So it's like only good things.
Only good things can come if Peter Quill was never Star-Lord.
And the other funny thing is, like, it totally even removes the question of, like, the key moment in Infinity War where Peter Quill, like, is the reason that they're not able to get the Infinity Gauntlet away from Thanos
at
the end. Right, that whole thing doesn't even, that scenario doesn't exist. So it like preempts his even worse decisions.
Indeed. So it was a lot of fun. I mean, I had some issues with it, and let's talk about it. But overall, I really enjoyed the episode, and like, what I think that you want these episodes to do is you want them to kind of send your mind reeling about the possibilities. Like, oh my, like, yeah, what if that actually, you want to like think about the second, third order effects. Now, I think it's also, this episode is very silly and exaggerated as well, because it's like, do I really believe that Thanos could have changed his mind because like he had an amazing chat with T'Challa? You know, like, I don't know that I buy that, but it's fun to think about. It's fun to think about, so.
Well, I mean, we can talk about it as we get on, but there's like some fun ramifications of that. Like, and I did like that they acknowledged, you know, in this that he is still the Mad Titan, which is, I guess, a name they never really gave him in the movies. But we can talk about that stuff as things go on.
So we start with Uatu the Watcher again, and you seem to be disappointed by how the Watcher is being used so far in the show notes, Dan Gvozden.
Well, yeah. I mean, first of all, we've not really seen what he looks like. I mean, I know what he looks like because I'm a big fan of the character, but here he's still kind of present as this like cosmic silhouette.
Yes.
And, you know, I don't expect him to interact because that's his whole thing, is just watching. Although try explaining that to anybody in your life that's not a comics reader. Like, so what's the deal with this guy? Well, he just watches things. Okay, and you know, like, there's nothing really all that interesting. He's just a narrator.
Yeah.
And I kind of expected more of him by this point, rather than just like Jeffrey Wright showing up in a sound booth for a day. I don't know. He takes on a little bit of a larger visual presence in this episode. He kind of shows up in some backgrounds here and there, which maybe were like, I don't know yet because I don't know the show well enough yet to say whether there's going to be some kind of arc throughout the 9 episodes. Maybe the Watcher gets more involved as things go on. You know, in which case this could be an interesting step forward. We're starting to see him visualized in some way. But I do hope that, because otherwise I feel like it's kind of a waste of the Watcher.
Fair enough. Fair enough. I mean, to me, it's just like he's a bookending framing device, and I don't expect anything more from him. But
okay,
I wanted to call out your disappointment. So we kind of begin this episode at Morag. This is a scene from Guardians of the Galaxy, and we're meant to think it's Peter Quill. But then we find out it's actually Chadwick Boseman, and I think, is it Jamin Hunsu is playing that guy who encounters him, and you know, rather than being like, "Who are you?" he's like fanboying out all over him, and it's very funny, it's very silly, and it's driving a stake into the heart of Peter Quill as a character, I think.
Yeah, and again, emphasis on it being like really silly. Like they have like a mock fight and things like that. You know, yeah. I thought like immediately the tone was very different in this episode from the previous, where like, you know, Captain Carter is mercilessly killing Nazis. Here, things are like a lot more slapstick.
Right. So then we discover through flashback that what happened was, what if Michael Rooker's character from Guardians of the Galaxy did not go down himself to get Peter Quill? What if he outsourced it? What if Yondu sent some of his B team instead to get Peter Quill? Instead, they might have accidentally kidnapped T'Challa, who just had accidentally wandered outside of the walls of Wakanda through childhood mishap. So this to me was like really sad and depressing, I guess. Was the only part of the episode that I thought was kind of a bummer, was the idea that T'Challa has been, to his family, missing for his entire life.
Yeah.
And I don't know that the episode truly reckons with it. I mean, they reunite at the end, but like, you know, it's a huge bummer. It's kind of sad.
You do see some of like what they've been doing in his absence, right? Like they've been searching for him,
yes,
and scouring the universe, which we can get into. I did think it was interesting that I thought the justification for why this occurred was kind of interesting. That like they mixed up the readings because they were looking for something not of this earth, and they picked up on the vibranium in Wakanda. Like in terms of justifications, I thought that was pretty neat. Although I don't know, like on a character level, why they wouldn't just kind of like throw him back to Earth and go. If there are real ramifications of Ego's, half celestial child still existing on Earth, which we see later on, wouldn't they keep scouring? It's not like they have like a timetable. They have to kind of, you just kind of have to buy it.
Yeah.
But I thought like the justification was pretty good, but didn't get me all the way.
Fair enough. So then we flash back forward to the present day, and we learn a little bit more about the implications. Like, T'Challa has successfully argued Josh Brolin's Thanos down to not killing everyone, which, again, it beggars belief that he could be converted just by mere argument, but that's how badass T'Challa is. It's really about how amazing T'Challa is what this episode is.
He was on the debate team on Yondu's ship. That's really, really what happened. Yeah.
Yeah. And Drax is really into T'Challa as well. We see him at the bar, and then we see Nebula show up, and she's blonde, and her body has not been ripped apart by Thanos. What do you make of what Nebula's history is in this universe, right? I guess in this universe, Thanos was not a hard ass and therefore treated his children better. Is that kind of the implication here, you think?
What I read from it was, and I think they kind of doubled down on this later in the episode when they refer to Nebula's eye, is that like he was the like insane genocidal warlord that we knew him to be and did torture his daughter. But eventually, he was coerced out of it. So some of the broader implications or the broader side effects of his abuse never occurred. Yeah. So she was tortured by him to some degree, but not completely in the same way that we know her to be. I mean, to me, this was the most interesting scene in the episode. Maybe not the most fun, but like just seeing all the ramifications. Like I like the little details, like how the ship, instead of being called the Milano, is now called the Mandela, which I thought was interesting considering we got a Nelson Mandela verbal appearance in the Loki final episode. But just kind of seeing like people calling Thanos like Captain Genocide or just arguing with him, it's still just genocide. I thought that was all fun. I think the Drax
because it's kind of like what fans talk about, right, when we're arguing about the movies, right? Like, and you're kind of seeing that meta narrative, like component of watching Marvel infiltrate the actual show itself.
Yeah, and to add on to that, like the MacGuffin of this episode is the Embers of Genesis, which are like terraforming, magic terraforming MacGuffin, and it's essentially a solution that other people have kind of posed, which is like, hey, Thanos, instead of snapping half of everybody away, why not just double the resources? That way you don't have to kill people. And this is literally like a magic device that essentially does as much. So it's like it's even doubling down on their Thanos criticism.
I think, by the way, that this is a pretty overt reference to Star Trek II: Wrath of Khan. Did you ever watch that movie? I've
actually never seen it. I'm gonna like hang up my nerd credentials.
Here. You should. It's a great movie. But there is literally a device called the Genesis device in Star Trek II: Wrath of Khan that, according to Wikipedia, reorganizes dead matter into habitable worlds. And also has the downside of if you ignite it on a place where people are living, it kills them, right? So
there you go.
It's very, very similar, I think. So I think it's a reference to Wrath of Khan Genesis Project. That's or Genesis device. But yes, the Embers of Genesis can heal dying worlds and terraform ecosystems and eradicate hunger in this show. So that's the MacGuffin of the episode, right?
The only thing that really didn't work for me in this scene was the Drax stuff. I felt like whoever was performing Drax, I'm sorry, I didn't look up who it was. I thought it was a bad Drax impression. Like, if we're being critical of what's his face doing, Sebastian Stan doing Bucky, I thought this was an even bigger standout.
Really? I thought it was fine. It didn't stick out to me. But
maybe it's because I didn't feel like they did anything with the character. Like, okay, cool, he's a bartender, and I guess his wife and daughter are still alive because Thanos didn't kill them. But like, I don't know. I think there's an opportunity to see a reformed character there in an interesting way.
I don't know. I think it's part of the long-running Peter Quill gag in this episode.
Okay.
The relationship between Drax and Peter Quill is like one of derision and scorn, basically. And it's just another example of, this guy who would otherwise think Peter Quill is a drip now thinks Star-Lord is incredible. It's just another in that long-running series, I think. So
I just think there's a more interesting place to put him than being like a bartender, like what if he was like an agent of peace or a priest or something like that? I just feel like there's a way to comment on like, hey, this guy whose only reason to live is to kill suddenly has like some other reason to live. What would that be?
Interesting.
And I don't know if like slinging drinks is the most interesting choice you could come up with.
Interesting. You're saying basically like the implications of like if the Guardians of the Galaxy had never come together in their current form, right? Like what would happen?
Right. I mean, like Drax's only mission is to avenge his dead wife and daughter, and if they're still alive, what does that mean for the character? Like, allow us some insight into who he is without that.
Maybe
mission.
he has discovered a love of mixing drinks, Dan Gvozden. You know what I mean? Like, don't judge, dude. I'm
not trying to say that that's not like completely fulfilling for some people, but it's not what I would imagine Drax doing, and maybe that's a weakness on my imagination.
A, people contain multitudes. B, check your biases is what I have to say about that. Okay,
I will back off. I will back up.
All right. So what else happens? So they gotta go get this Embers of Genesis, basically, right?
Right.
And why do they have to get it? It's just for a job, right? Isn't it? Or
yeah, I believe it's just for a job.
It's just a gig for them. So
I mean, there's a little bit of a twist later on. They're also doing it to fulfill a debt that Nebula owes, but that comes in much later and is kind of perfunctory.
So they go to nowhere. They break into the Collector's Museum, and really, this whole sequence is probably the most substantive addition to our understanding of characters in the MCU is let's talk about the Collector, right? Prior to this point, the Collector has been played in the movies by Benicio del Toro, and I will just say in terms of if you ask me to word associate with the Collector and Benicio del Toro's version of the character, I would say ineffectual, weak, lame. These are the words I would use to describe the Collector. Like, what do you think of Benicio? Just because he has been given almost nothing to do, and when we see him, he's usually in the process of being taken down or doing something seemingly small and insignificant that only potentially pays off later. He just hasn't struck me as particularly compelling.
Yeah, no, I think that's a fair point. I mean, he's a big player in the comics. In the original like Thanos quest or the kind of lead up to the Infinity Gauntlet, he is. I guess it's true also in like Infinity War and Guardians of the Galaxy. He is involved in the hijinks with the stones or gems of power. But he's like a major player. He's there's like him. There's a guy called the Gardener. There's all these like major kind of like entities that Thanos goes to kind of defeat and acquire the stones of power, and they give him kind of that role in Guardians of the Galaxy, and he's a little bit threatening, and then he's got these people kidnapped, but he's kind of subverted by his assistant, or I guess his slave rather. But you're right, he is kind of shown to be ineffectual. I believe in Infinity War when we see him again, he's just being murdered by Thanos. So you're right, this is a bit of a subversion. It's much more in line with how he's presented in the comics.
Right, and I think what we see here is a guy who is threatening, unpleasant, and also theoretically quite powerful. right?
Right. Yeah, I mean, he's got the Black Order working for him. You know, all of Thanos' old henchmen.
Right. So he seems like quite a formidable foe in this episode. And that's something that's really cool about the show is I think several of the Marvel TV shows and now this like kind of do some rehabilitation for some of the things that they couldn't or wouldn't do in the movies, right?
Are you just waiting on your Thor 2 rehab to continue?
Thor 2 rehab happens. Other like the Collector now is like, wow, next time I see the Collector in a movie, if that ever happens again, I'm like, oh yeah, he's kind of like got some skills and is a dangerous presence. And also just the idea of a guy who collects humanoid specimens or living specimens is kind of frightening and upsetting. So I think they really kind of pay off that potential in this episode. So
yeah, one of the things I loved just kind of like formally about this episode is like how they break into the Collector's Museum to get this stuff. It's like one of those classic heist movie setups where you have the people discussing the plan and then you cross cut to them pulling it off. So you're kind of both experiencing the heist and learning how the heist works while it's going on, Ocean's 11 style. I thought that was a lot of fun.
I dig it. Here's what's amazing about this series as well, What If, is you're not only referencing stuff that happened in the movie, you're referencing Easter eggs that happens in the movies, right? Like,
right.
We see it was talked about online by a lot of people like, oh, Howard the Duck, the MCU character is in one of the Collector's boxes. And it's like, if you freeze frame it and like zoom in, you can see Howard the Duck, and people talked about that and wrote articles about it. And then Howard the Duck is a character in this episode. And I liked how it worked out because you don't need to know who Howard the Duck is for this episode to function.
No,
he's just a guy that's there. But if you know about that history of Howard the Duck and him being in the background, all that stuff, it's an extra delight for you, right?
I am desperate for a Howard the Duck animated series. Like, I just want it to happen. I mean, if you've read those, Steve Gerber comics from when he first debuted, he's one of the most fun characters in the Marvel universe, and I enjoy the movie for what it is. I think if you can accept it as what it is, it's kind of fun. But I think the character in pop culture hasn't really gotten his due. And to have someone like Seth Green voicing him, it's kind of like a perfect setup to do like a kind of zany Robot Chicken style thing with Howard the Duck. I guess we got it with MODOK. But I feel like Howard the Duck is even more appropriate way to kind of, he's Deadpool before Deadpool. He was skewering the Marvel Universe before Deadpool was even making jokes. So I don't know. I like when he's highlighted here. He gets to like say his line that he said from Guardians of the Galaxy 2, the post film sting where he's kind of hitting on this prostitute. Here he gets to kind of like repeat that role again, but I don't know. I'm begging for more Howard the Duck at this point.
Fair enough. So they go through this heist, and there's like, the beats that we'd expect to hit in a heist, which is, oh, you found out that so-and-so was in it all along. T'Challa finds out a little bit more about his past and about Yondu's decisions, right? And I'm curious if there's anything here that you want to highlight. You mentioned in the show notes the intergalactic empire of Wakanda.
Sure. So, like, he finds out that Wakanda, of course, still exists. Well, not of course. Anything could happen in a what if. But they've been kind of scouring the galaxy with these spaceships, or I guess the universe, to find T'Challa. And actually, recently in the comics, I guess as of 3 years ago or 2 years ago, Ta-Nehisi Coates and his artist partner Daniel Acuna introduced the intergalactic empire of Wakanda in the newest volume 7 of Black Panther, where Wakanda started moving beyond Earth into space, and I don't want to say colonizing because it's probably culturally insensitive, but they began expanding their empire into space. With T'Challa kind of leading them. And so to me, this was a pretty direct call to that series, which is neat. We haven't really seen much of,
Wakanda
that kind of
in space,
idea.
basically. Right?
Yeah. I mean, this is the first time it's been presented anywhere in media this way, and it has to be, I would imagine, directly from that cool comic series.
So a bunch of stuff happens, and essentially T'Challa and the Collector have a big fight, which I thought was kind of cool. It felt very fan fiction-y to me, you know, like, oh, and the Collector, he pulls out all these items, and it has like Captain America's shield and like literally like all these other cool weapons from different worlds. And you know, as a nerd / geek, I enjoyed seeing him break all this stuff out, and I think all the action in the show is pretty well done. It's well staged and choreographed overall. So I had a fun time with this. Anything you want to mention that came out of this sequence?
Well, I was kind of hoping that it would continue, like, and do one of those like Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon dojo fight things where they just go through all the weapons.
Yeah.
But I did like he starts off with like Korg's rock arm, which he doesn't use it by name, but like you can imagine it's Korg, and then he's got Malekith's knife and Gila's crown and Necro sword.
Yes,
I don't know. I mean, it was cool to see those things like reappropriated, and just to imagine, hey, this guy took down all these people. So
right, you kind of wonder, like, okay, you're talking about karmic payback, right? Like in this universe, the Collector has potentially killed Gila or taken Gila's crown, like. What would have had to happen for the Collector to have Gila's stuff?
Right.
You know
is he in charge of Asgard? Is he, I mean, clearly it seems like he defeated Captain America at some point, you know?
Right. Right.
So there are some like, there's a lot of and this is the fun thing of What If, is like, what are the repercussions of even just a little Easter egg in the background? What could that possibly mean? You know?
Yeah. We get to see Thanos fighting. What is it? Did you say the Dark Order? Is that what it's called? Or
the Black Order?
The Black Order, right. And that's kind of fun because we've seen Thanos fight in Infinity War and in Endgame a little bit. And it's just cool to see him fighting his own dudes, you know, to see him fighting his own henchmen for a change. And like, what? And would he even be able to defeat them, basically?
Right. I enjoyed it as like a comic nerd. For me, the line of the episode was that they're like, you know, you'd have to be crazy to go fight them. And he says, I'm not crazy, mad. And he like goes back because in the comics, he's known as Thanos, the Mad
Titan, right.
And I don't think they've used that terminology in the MCU yet. So it was fun to see that.
Did they use the term Mad Titan earlier in the episode?
Yeah, they do. But like it was Brolin's delivery of it that sold it for me.
I agree, and I'm a fan of like them setting it up and then paying it. You know, at least they set it up as opposed to just that's the first time you heard the term Mad Titan.
Oh, this is gonna wrinkle your like Scarlet Witch alert.
Yes, I am generally not a fan of when somebody looks into the camera and then says what their superhero name is that's from the comics that they don't do anything to explain in the actual show itself. So
fair.
Yeah. So then they basically, one of the coolest parts of this episode, I thought, was when, Nebula like pours the Genesis embers down the big guy's throat or whatever, right? Yeah. And then like he starts like sprouting seeds like Tom from the fountain, you know, like that stuff was super cool. And just the idea that like life can actually bring death, you know, is a common theme in both Wrath of Khan, in Darren Aronofsky's The Fountain, and like even though this episode's not really about that, you kind of see that idea in, you know, all these massive vines sprouting from this guy's body. What'd you think of that as like one of the concluding elements of the episode?
Great visual. I mean, just to repeat that, you know, then it comes out even further, and you've got the skull of a Celestial that is now known as Nowhere, that suddenly is brimming with green life. Yeah. So, you know, that kind of classic flower growing out of a skull imagery is kind of showcased here in a neat way. And I thought that was really cool. I mean, nothing like a high-speed escape to end an episode.
So at this point, T'Challa knows that Wakanda still exists, so they bring him back to Wakanda, and he reunites with his father, and it's kind of emotional. And then everyone meets each other at the party, and they have banter, and it's kind of fun. And you know, this is again one of my complaints of the episode is like boy, that's pretty dark that they took his kid for several decades. You know what I mean? Like, that's a pretty dark premise that I don't know that the show fully reckons with, because it would just, if something like that happened in real life, it would be like incredibly emotional and also challenging to forgive such a thing. But the ending kind of is like, yep, everyone's happy and everything's copacetic. But I'm glad that they at least acknowledge it by having them get reunited at the end. Any thoughts on the final scene here?
Yeah, I mean, it's probably my biggest problem with the episode too, is like T'Challa gets upset at Yondu in the jail cell scene,
yeah,
to the point of saying like, "You're not my family," and then kind of I think like, yeah, Yondu steps in and saves him, but I feel like T'Challa doesn't actually have to take the steps for that kind of growth. Nor, maybe he shouldn't have to, right? I mean, like, he was stolen from his family,
yeah,
you know? And Yondu gives this kind of speech like, you're an explorer. You would have ended up, you know, here anyway, even though we know better as the audience.
Right.
So, like, I felt like, I mean, it's almost the same complaint I have about the previous episode is they set up these really interesting, you know, character, you know, like, you know, new relationships, but because they have to, you know, get through this in half an hour and do so much exposition and stuff, I feel like they end up kind of leaning into the exposition and action more than I think even more interesting character stuff, which is like, would T'Challa forgive Yondu in the same way as Peter Quill?
Mm-hmm.
You know, like Peter Quill, who comes from, you know, a family that's a little bit more broken than T'Challa's, right? Like, that would be interesting to explore. But I don't think it really gets into any of the real heart of like what the true differences between T'Challa and Peter Quill are. And like you said, it ends up becoming a bit of just a giant slam on Peter Quill. But I think in some ways, Peter Quill, you know, coming from that, you know, kind of broken background and finding a way to become better for it,
yeah,
is almost better suited for this role than T'Challa, who, you know, might come back to Earth due to family ties and not really want to guard the galaxy anymore. I think there's so many interesting things to explore there, and we both, although we have a little bit of a humorous, you know, pan left and right across everybody having conversations, none of those conversations are as deep as some of the things they set up.
We've been talking about how this episode's kind of a slam on Peter Quill, but it's also in many ways the reverse of like T'Challa is a real badass. We got a taste of that in Black Panther, and the episode's kind of saying, you know, if T'Challa was put in this place where he had much more reach for his skills and his empathy and his inclinations, he would be able to make an even bigger impact than if he was just Prince or King of Wakanda, right? So I do think that's important to acknowledge too. It's not just like Peter Quill's lame, which is true. It's also T'Challa is awesome, right? And really, really awesome. But I think, you know, in my opinion, like it's trying to get laughs from the Peter Quill is lame part, right? Like the T'Challa part is awesome. We already kind of knew that. Peter Quill is lame. We suspected it, and now we know for sure that that's what the show thinks. So.
Yeah, I mean, I think it kind of cheats past T'Challa's character journey in Black Panther, right?
Yes.
Because he's a flawed character, I mean, much in the way that Loki did with the variant Loki, that it just kind of sped past and, you know, asked us to accept that that character's entire fundamental, you know, reason to exist, you know, to cause mischief was kind of put aside when he saw how his story played out. That's not the case here. T'Challa is kind of already fully formed without having gone on that journey from Black Panther. And I mean, you know, our feelings about the Black Panther movie aside, I think like T'Challa is kind of, I don't know if he's like the least interesting character in that movie, but like, I think, you know, we don't learn a ton about like what makes him tick in Black Panther. I think some of those attributes carry over here. Like, he wants to expand Wakanda's reach. Instead of being so insular, he wants to, you know, open them up to the world. And I think that fits in with the kind of explorer personality that he has in this show. But yeah, I mean, I think his character is a little bit like exaggerated, and I wonder if that's in like kind of like in the wake of Chadwick Boseman's death, that the character can kind of only be seen for his positive attributes. Which is, we haven't mentioned yet that this is the final performance from Chadwick Boseman. you know, in this show, I guess in the Marvel universe. I don't know if there's any other recorded thing that's yet to be released from him, but I have to imagine this is his final released performance. And I thought it was a lot of fun to hear his voice again.
I agree. It's wonderful and a sad reminder of the fact that he's gone. I think that I because of that, Dan Gvozden, I doubt that they like altered it in any way after his passing, because he obviously recorded this beforehand. And they dedicated the episode to him, which was very lovely. So
agreed.
But yeah, I would agree with you that they take components of the character that were seeded in Black Panther and kind of expand, like fast forward, you know, many iterations to get to the version of the character that we see here. So,
well, in some ways that's interesting because it might be it's a version of the character we're likely never to get. In the MCU, you know, I have no idea what direction they're taking.
Black Panther
and I don't envy them for a second, but it is nice to see kind of like a super optimistic, you know, like projection of what Black Panther could be to everyone.
Indeed. All right, closing thoughts on this episode, Dan Gvozden?
I thought this was a step forward for the series. You know, it makes me excited to see what's coming. I'm a little bit dubious about the ending of it, where, you know, Peter Quill is working in a Dairy Queen, which again, another dunk on that character, and his father shows up because it suggests
again, you know, nothing wrong with working at a Dairy Queen, Dan.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, sorry, I'm very close-minded.
I will grant you that working at a Dairy Queen probably a downgrade from traveling around the galaxy stealing Infinity Stones. Okay, so I will grant you that.
I won't ask you for your fast food restaurant rankings and where Dairy Queen resides, but I do enjoy a good blizzard from every now and again. I guess it's Cyclone at Dairy Queen.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, so the one reason I'm really dubious about it is like it seems it's setting it up for a sequel, just like the Captain Carter episode. And, you know, they had said that Captain Carter is returning next season. And I wonder if we're going to get more of this. Probably not, because Chadwick Boseman passed on. Yeah. But, you know, for me, the appeal of this series is just seeing like new. And if all the episodes are going to end with these cliffhangers that are going to be resolved later on, I think that's just way less exciting for the show's future.
I would agree with that. So we'll see. Overall, though, really enjoyable episode, a lot of fun, and I enjoyed watching it. Hope you enjoyed hearing us talk about it. You can find the audio podcast version of this recording over at patreon.com/Dave Chen. Back me on patreon.com/Dave Chen to support my work and to get other bonus audio and video as well. Check out Dan Gvozden's podcast, The Amazing Spider Talk, at amazingspidertalk.com. Dan Gvozden, it's been a pleasure to chat with you.
Same here, David. Looking forward to What If Episode 3.
Hey everyone, thanks so much for watching that video. We generally try to stream the recaps for shows like What If and other Marvel shows live because we love the audience interaction. We couldn't do it this time around for episodes 2 and 3, but we hope you enjoyed the video nonetheless. I want to give a big shout out to all my patrons at patreon.com/Dave Chen. Sign up there for bonus audio and video content. They make this channel possible. Thank you so much. Thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next one.